Honorable ministers and heads of delegation, distinguished representatives of the member states, Mr. Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Albert Ramdin, Mr. Assistant Secretary General, Nestor Mendez, permanent observers to the OAS, representatives of inter-American and international organizations, representatives of civil society, the private sector, and other special actors, special guests, and ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to welcome you to this 55th regular session of the General Assembly of the Organization of American States, held in the vibrant and welcoming city of St. John's, Antigua and Barbuda. On behalf of all the delegations, I express sincere appreciation to the government and the people of Antigua and Barbuda for their generous hospitality. As we gather here today, we're reminded not only of Antigua and Barbuda's contributions to the hemispheric agenda, but also of the unique identity and national pride that make it such a valued member of our inter-American community. Okay, now we will proceed with the election of the President of the General Assembly. In keeping with the rules of procedure of the General Assembly, we now move to the election of the President of this regular session. I now open the floor for delegations wishing to submit a nomination. Floor is open. Colombia.
Muchas gracias a todos. Gracias, señor presidente, por concederme el uso de la palabra. Distinguidos colegas, muy buenos días a todos. Quiero expresar en nombre de Colombia nuestro más sincero agradecimiento al gobierno y al pueblo de Antigua y Barbuda por su cálida acogida y su siempre generosa hospitalidad. Nos sentimos honrados de reunirnos hoy aquí con todos ustedes, con la esperanza de que este regreso de una Asamblea General al Caribe sea ideal para que reafirmemos nuestro compromiso con la OEA, sus mandatos, los valores y principios que nos unen y con la solución concertada de los desafíos comunes que hoy nos traen aquí. Confiamos en que además sea una fuente de inspiración para alcanzar los resultados deseados y sobre todo los objetivos concretos a los cuales todos aspiramos. Colombia quisiera postular al ministro de Asuntos Exteriores, Comercio y Asuntos de Barbuda, honorable Everly Paul Shedd-Green, para presidir esta asamblea. Estamos convencidos de que su liderazgo y compromiso serán fundamentales y serán instrumentales para guiar nuestros trabajos con eficiencia, eficacia y sobre todo con una visión regional hacia el futuro que todos queremos construir. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Colombia. Will anybody second? The Dominican Republic, I understand I call upon you.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Distinguidas delegaciones, muy buenos días a todos. República Dominicana tiene el honor de secundar la propuesta presentada por la ministra de Relaciones Exteriores de Colombia, Su Excelencia Laura Saravia, en la que se nomina a Su Excelencia Paul Shedd-Green, ministro de Relaciones Exteriores de Antigua y Barbuda, para ejercer la presidencia del 50º periodo ordinario de sesiones de esta Asamblea General. Conocemos y valoramos profundamente el compromiso y el espíritu de colaboración del canciller Shedd-Green, cualidades que sin duda sabrá poner al servicio de todos en esta importante responsabilidad, y por eso confiamos en que bajo su liderazgo este periodo de sesiones será guiado con la debida cercanía, apertura al diálogo y una genuina vocación para juntos construir soluciones que vayan en el bienestar de nuestro pueblo. Muchas gracias.
Seeing no other nominations, I move to approve. Okay? So we're approved. We've already got that. Your Excellency, Everly Paul Chet Green, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Trade, and Barbuda Affairs of Antigua and Barbuda. On behalf of all member states, allow me to extend our heartfelt congratulations on your election as President of the 55th regular session of the General Assembly of the Organization of American States. We extend our heartfelt congratulations on your election and reaffirm our unwavering confidence in your leadership during this assembly. Your generous hospitality in hosting this pivotal gathering is deeply appreciated and reflects the spirit of unity and purpose. You may count on our steadfast support as you guide our shared endeavors. Under your stewardship, we are confident that this assembly will foster meaningful dialogue, strengthen multilateral cooperation, and advance the shared values and priorities that unite our hemisphere. I now invite you, sir, to take your place at the head table.
Honorable Ministers of Foreign Affairs and Heads of Delegation, esteemed Ambassador Benoni Bedi, Chair of the OAS Permanent Council and of the General Assembly's Preparatory Committee and Permanent Representative of Brazil to the OAS, distinguished representatives of member states, esteemed Secretary General of the OAS, Albert Ramdin, and esteemed Assistant General Secretary of the OAS, Nestor Mendez, distinguished permanent observers of the OAS, representatives of international organizations, representatives of civil society organizations and other social actors, special guests, ladies and gentlemen. First, I'd like to thank the distinguished Minister of Foreign Affairs and Head of Delegation of Colombia, Her Excellency Laura Sarabia, and the distinguished Minister of Foreign Affairs and Head of Delegation of the Dominican Republic, His Excellency Roberto Alvarez, for my nomination and for supporting me in assuming the presidency of this hemispheric forum, the most important forum in our region. Before we move on to the next agenda item, I'd like to make a very brief announcement, housekeeping, regarding the request for floor procedure. To request the floor, you press the button on your microphone, a green light will appear. That light indicates your request has been received. When granted the floor, technician will activate your microphone and the light will turn red. Please note that if you press the button for a second time before being given the floor, this will cancel your request and you will lose your place in the queue. Again, that is a matter of housekeeping, for which I thank you for observing. As the next item on the agenda and the order of business, and in accordance with provisions of Article 34 of the Rules of Procedure, We will now proceed with the adoption of the draft agenda for the 55th regular session of the General Assembly. This has been published as document AG/Doc 5874/25. In this regard, I would like to inform that the delegation of the Commonwealth of Bahamas, through a note distributed as a document AG/CP/INF 851/25, requested the removal of the item Report and Discussion on the Organization's Financial Health, which had previously been proposed by the same delegation from the draft of the General Assembly. With this in mind, I now consult whether we can proceed with the adoption of the agenda. Approved. We now turn our attention to item number 3 on the order of business, which concerns the adoption of the draft schedule of the 55th regular session of the General Assembly. Document AG/Doc 5875/25. As you can see, the closing session is scheduled for 7 p.m. tomorrow evening, June 27th. I would therefore like to ask that the distinguished delegates, for your greatest possible cooperation, so that we can complete our consideration of all agenda items by that time. Please remember that under Article 15 of the General Assembly's Rules and Procedure, the President has the authority to make any adjustments necessary to the schedule under consideration. Since there are no further comments, the draft schedule of the 55th regular session of the General Assembly is adopted. We turn our attention to agenda item number 4. It is now our responsibility to formally adopt the agreements reached by the Preparatory Committee in advance of this 55th regular session. To this end, I now have the honor of giving the floor to His Excellency Ambassador Benoni Belli, the permanent representative of Brazil to the Organization of the American States and chair of the Preparatory Committee, who will present a report on the committee's work. Ambassador Belli, you have the floor.
Obrigado, senhor presidente, excelentíssimos chefes de delegação, senhor secretário-geral, senhor secretário-geral adjunto, representantes dos Estados-membros, observadores permanentes, ilustres convidados. Na qualidade de presidente da comissão preparatória, tenho a honra de apresentar o relatório das atividades realizadas em preparação para o 55º período ordinário de sessões da Assembleia Geral da Organização dos Estados Americanos. Este relatório, distribuído como documento AG/DOC 5893/25, revisão 1, resume os trabalhos desenvolvidos nas reuniões da Comissão Preparatória em 15 de maio e 4 de junho de 2025, bem como na sessão ordinária do Conselho Permanente, atuando como Comissão Preparatória em 18 de junho de 2025. Conforme o regulamento da Assembleia Geral, a Comissão considerou e aprovou a proposta de agenda desta sessão ordinária, construída a partir dos temas mandatados pela Carta da Organização dos Estados Americanos, o regulamento e as decisões anteriores da Assembleia Geral. Além disso, foram incorporadas propostas de Estados-membros que destacam eventos históricos, manifestações culturais e temas de grande relevância para a região e para a organização neste momento de transição institucional. Além da agenda, a Comissão considerou e aprovou o projeto de calendário da sessão, o qual, embora flexível, servirá de base para o andamento dos trabalhos deste período ordinário de sessões. A Comissão também considerou e aprovou as recomendações sobre procedimentos que foram publicadas como documento AG/DOC 5876/25. Essas diretrizes são fundamentais para assegurar que os trabalhos desta sessão transcorram de forma eficiente, transparente e ordenada. Dentre os principais aspectos acordados, destacam-se a duração das intervenções dos chefes de delegação, limitada a 6 minutos, a fim de garantir ampla participação e bom andamento dos debates. O prazo final para apresentação de propostas estabelecido para as 9 horas da manhã da quarta-feira, 25 de junho de 2025. O registro das sessões plenárias em ata integral, enquanto as atas da Comissão Geral seguirão em formato resumido. A utilização do sistema eletrônico já consolidado para pedidos de palavra, assim como a aplicação da ordem de precedência no diálogo dos chefes de delegação. A gravação e preservação dos registros audiovisuais das sessões como instrumento de transparência e memória institucional. E, por fim, a autorização do uso de notas de rodapé em declarações e resoluções, conforme orientações específicas previamente estabelecidas. A comissão também conduziu o sorteio, conforme estabelecido no regulamento, para definir a ordem de precedência das delegações. Os Estados Unidos e a Turquia foram sorteados para liderar, respectivamente, as listas de Estados-membros e observadores permanentes. Senhor Presidente, gostaria de expressar minha sincera gratidão a todas as delegações que participaram ativamente dos trabalhos preparatórios. A dedicação e o espírito construtivo demonstrados foram fundamentais para alcançarmos este momento com uma base sólida para uma Assembleia produtiva. Muito obrigado e agradeço às delegações pela atenção.
Thank you, Ambassador. Having heard the report of the chair of the preparatory committee, I submit to the plenary for consideration the recommendations on procedures for the 55th regular session contained in document AG/doc 5876/25. I would like to point to the following matters addressed therein, requesting the distinguished delegates to bear them in mind until our work is completed. And these are: 1, in accordance with provisions of Article 18 of the General Assembly's Rules of Procedure, at plenary sessions, heads of delegations have a maximum of 6 minutes for the presentations. 2, the period for presenting new proposals related to the items on the agenda ended yesterday at 9 a.m. The Assistant Secretary General will report to the plenary on the proposals received before the end of that period. Thirdly, this 54th regular session of the General Assembly, which began yesterday, Wednesday, June 25th, is to conclude tomorrow, Friday, June 27th. Fourth, the minutes of the plenary sessions will be verbatim, and the minutes of the meetings of the General Committee will be summary minutes. 5, requests for the floor will follow the traditional order of requests through the average conference unit. And the dialogue of heads of delegation, the floor will be given according to the order of precedence established by a lot by the preparatory committee, which begins with the distinguished delegation of the United States. 6, the General Secretariat is further instructed to take the steps necessary to ensure that the voice recordings of all sessions and meetings held during this regular session are duly recorded, retained, and kept to be made available to the member states upon request. 7, the delegations may include footnotes to the declarations and resolutions, provided that they are expressly announced during the session at which those documents are considered. The period for forwarding footnotes to the Secretariat is the closing session. And number 8, the Secretariat will publish the volume of adopted declarations and resolutions, together with the footnotes received in due time after the close of session. Footnotes announced but not forwarded to the Secretariat before the closing session will be included in the volume but without their text. Those texts will be incorporated into the volume of declarations and resolutions adopted in due course by the Style Committee. There being objections, the procedural matters are adopted. Item 5, report of the Secretary General on credentials. With respect to the next item on our order of business, I would like to note that in accordance with the provisions of Article 27 of the Rules of Procedure, the Secretary General has submitted the corresponding report on the credentials of the delegations participating in this regular session. This report provides a record of the credentials received in due form from the delegations of member states and permanent observers. as well as those from representatives of the organs, agencies, and entities of the Inter-American System and other international organizations. Based on this report, the Secretariat will prepare the provisional list of participants, which will be made available to all delegations. After you take note of this report, Item 6, we shall now proceed with the presentation of the annual report of the Permanent Council for the period 2024-2025. It is therefore my honor to invite His Excellency Ambassador Benoni Belli, Permanent Representative of Brazil to the OAS and Chair of the Permanent Council, to take the floor. Ambassador Belli will present the report outlining the activities undertaken by the Permanent Council since the 54th regular session of the General Assembly in Asunción.
Obrigado, senhor presidente. Tenho a honra de apresentar o relatório anual do Conselho Permanente da Organização dos Estados Americanos referente ao período julho de 2024 a junho de 2025, distribuído sob o número AG/DOC 5879/25. Este ciclo foi marcado por desafios significativos, mas também por avanços institucionais e políticos relevantes, sempre orientados pelos princípios da legalidade, do diálogo construtivo e da cooperação multilateral, fundamentos que sustentam a legitimidade e eficácia deste órgão essencial do sistema interamericano. Neste cenário de profundas transformações, o Conselho Permanente reafirmou seu papel como foro político central da OEA, atuando com firmeza na promoção dos valores democráticos, na proteção dos direitos humanos, no fortalecimento da paz e na defesa dos povos das Américas. Destaco como marco simbólico deste período o processo eleitoral que resultou de maneira aberta, inclusiva e transparente da escolha da nova liderança da organização. O embaixador Albert Hamdin foi eleito por aclamação como secretário-geral no 56º período extraordinário da Assembleia Geral, e a embaixadora Laura Gil, eleita secretária-geral adjunta no 57º período extraordinário, sendo ela a primeira mulher a ocupar este cargo, um feito histórico que enriquece a representatividade e diversidade da nossa organização. Avançamos também no aprimoramento de nossos instrumentos de governança, com a reativação da Comissão Geral e a revisão do regulamento do Conselho Permanente, iniciativas impulsionadas por Antigua e Barbuda, Bolívia e Brasil. Tais medidas fortalecem a transparência, a previsibilidade e a eficiência do nosso trabalho coletivo. A pauta de direitos humanos esteve no centro das atenções. Celebramos 65 anos da Comissão Interamericana, os 55 anos da Convenção Americana e os 45 anos da Corte Interamericana de Direitos Humanos. Realizamos sessões dedicadas à igualdade de gênero, combate à desinformação, memória histórica e justiça racial, com destaque para as comemorações do Dia Internacional da Mulher, do Dia dos Direitos Humanos e do Dia em memória das vítimas da escravidão e do comércio transatlântico de escravos. A promoção dos direitos das pessoas afrodescendentes e dos povos indígenas manteve-se como prioridade, traduzida em resoluções concretas e espaços de escuta e construção conjunta. Com isso, avançamos rumo a uma agenda hemisférica mais justa, inclusiva e sensível à diversidade. A situação do Haiti permaneceu como tema prioritário. O Conselho Permanente acompanhou com atenção os desdobramentos, buscando apoiar soluções duradouras baseadas na soberania, dignidade e nos direitos fundamentais do povo haitiano. De forma paralela, mantivemos nossos compromissos com a integridade dos processos eleitorais em todo o hemisfério por meio de missões de observação que contribuem para a confiança nas instituições democráticas. A emergência climática mereceu atenção especial, com ênfase nas consequências do aumento do nível do mar para os pequenos estados insulares e comunidades costeiras. A sessão de 16 de outubro reafirmou o apelo à solidariedade internacional e à ação coletiva diante dessa ameaça existencial que seguirá exigindo coragem política e cooperação multilateral contínua. Destaco também importantes momentos diplomáticos vivenciados neste período. A sessão solene, em homenagem ao primeiro-ministro de Granada, Sua Excelência Dickon Mitchell, a despedida oficial do secretário-geral, Sr. Luiz Almagro, em 21 de maio de 2025, a sessão extraordinária de posse do novo secretário-geral, realizada no dia 10 de maio de 2025. Com responsabilidade, enfrentamos a delicada situação financeira da organização. O Conselho Permanente manteve-se vigilante e atuante, buscando alternativas viáveis e sustentáveis. A preparação do Programa Orçamento 2025 foi conduzida com transparência, diálogo franco e o apoio técnico fundamental da Comissão de Assuntos Administrativos e Orçamentários, a qual expresso minha sincera gratidão. Durante o período, realizamos 50 sessões formais, consolidando o Conselho como o espaço político mais relevante do sistema interamericano. Foram transmitidos a esta Assembleia Geral 13 projetos de resolução e um projeto de declaração, conforme debatido na última sessão regular, em 18 de junho. O estado das negociações está detalhado nos adendos 2 e 3 do relatório. Senhor presidente, gostaria de reconhecer o trabalho incansável dos representantes permanentes que exerceram a presidência do Conselho durante este ciclo. O embaixador Tarly Francis, de Granada, o embaixador Victor Fernandes, de Barbados, o embaixador Lin Yang, de Belize, e o embaixador Héctor Arce Zaconeta, da Bolívia. Estendo meus agradecimentos aos vice-presidentes, os representantes permanentes da Guatemala, a embaixadora Cláudia Escobar Mejia, dos Estados Unidos, embaixador Francisco Moura, de El Salvador, embaixadora Wendy Acevedo, e atualmente do Equador, embaixadora Mônica Palencia. Registro minha profunda gratidão ao secretário-geral, ao secretário-geral adjunto e às equipes da Secretaria-Geral pelo empenho constante em favor dos objetivos da OEA. Reconheço igualmente o papel essencial dos observadores permanentes, cuja solidariedade contínua e apoio concreto fortalecem a cooperação hemisférica. Desejo pleno êxito ao embaixador Stuart Savage, representante permanente do Canadá, que assumirá a presidência do Conselho Permanente. Conte com o nosso apoio. Muito obrigado.
Thank you, Ambassador Belly, for that very complete and detailed presentation of this report, and for the draft resolutions agreed upon by the Permanent Council, which are now forwarded by the General Assembly, or to the General Assembly for consideration. As is evident, the report presented reflects the complex and intensive work carried out by the Permanent Council over recent months. On behalf of the General Assembly, I express my most profound and sincere appreciation to the Member States, permanent and alternate representatives, for their invaluable contributions to the development of this hemispheric agenda. I would like to recognize the efforts, dedication, and commitment of the permanent representatives of Grenada, Barbados, Belize, Bolivia, and currently Brazil, who have chaired the Permanent Council during this period. I would also like to place on record recognition to the permanent representatives of Guatemala, United States, El Salvador, and currently Ecuador, who have served as the Permanent Council's vice chairs. That said, I suggest the General Assembly take note of the annual report of the Permanent Council and then proceed to the adoption of the following draft resolutions, for which, based on the information Ambassador Belly has just shared with us, consensus has now been reached. And these are: 1, draft resolution entitled Addressing the Critical Mental Health Crisis in the Americas. 2, draft resolution entitled Commemorating the Bicentennial of the Amphitheatonic Congress of Panama. 3, draft resolution entitled Hemispheric Commemoration of the 250th Anniversary of the Declaration of Independence of the United States of America. 4, draft resolution entitled Commemoration of the Bicentennial of the Independence of Bolivia. 5, draft resolution entitled Commemoration of the Bicentennial of the Independence of Eastern Republic of Uruguay, the Liberating Crusade and the Declaration of Independence of the Eastern Province. 6, draft resolution entitled Celebration of Spanish Language Week at the OAS. 7, draft resolution entitled Recognition of the Contributions of Pope Francis to Inter-American Values. 8, draft resolution entitled Advancing Hemispheric Initiatives on Integral Development. 9, draft resolution entitled Reaffirmation of Mandates and Establishment of a Mandate Management Mechanism. 10, draft resolution entitled Financing of the Program Budget of the Organization for 2026 and convening a special session of the General Assembly to consider and approve the program budget for 2026. And number 11, draft resolution entitled Amendment of Article 32(1) of the Statutes of Inter-American Defense Board regarding its headquarters. I now give the floor to delegations wishing to speak about the adopted declarations and resolutions. In that regard, I recognize the delegation of Paraguay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Haciendo referencia a la resolución sobre salud mental, obviamente Paraguay apoya la presente resolución, es una política de Estado también. Sin embargo, tenemos algunas consideraciones con relación a ciertas terminologías que hacen referencia a la estrategia de la OPS, por eso estaríamos presentando un pie de página al respecto. Simplemente eso. Gracias.
Paraguay, noted. I give the floor to the delegation of Panama, of Guatemala, sorry, Guatemala.
Muchas gracias. Guatemala desea hacer una explicación de voto sobre el proyecto de resolución hacer frente a la grave crisis de salud mental en las Américas. La pregunta es si lo puedo hacer en este momento. Ok. Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Guatemala acoge con beneplácito la próxima adopción de la resolución titulada Hacer frente a la grave crisis de salud mental en las Américas y agradece los esfuerzos colectivos que hicieron posible el consenso. Reiteramos nuestro firme compromiso con la promoción de políticas públicas inclusivas basadas en derechos humanos y centradas en las personas que permitan fortalecer la salud mental a lo largo del curso de vida. La República de Guatemala desea dejar constancia de que la presente resolución será aplicada de acuerdo a la Constitución Política de la República y nuestra legislación interna. En este contexto, deseamos destacar también que la República de Guatemala promueve, defiende y protege los derechos humanos de todas las personas sin discriminación alguna, en concordancia con su legislación nacional y lo pactado en los tratados internacionales ratificados por nuestro país. Este principio guía la política institucional de salud mental 2023-2028 del Ministerio de Salud Pública y Asistencia Social de la República de Guatemala, que tiene como objetivo principal mejorar el bienestar de la población mediante la implementación de servicios accesibles, integrales, comunitarios y culturalmente pertinentes, con especial atención a los grupos en situación de vulnerabilidad. Guatemala reafirma su voluntad de seguir colaborando con los Estados miembros y con los socios regionales para avanzar en la implementación de acciones concretas, sostenibles y con enfoque intersectorial que garanticen el derecho de todas las personas al más alto nivel posible de salud mental. Por último, Guatemala desea solicitar a la Secretaría General tomar nota de esta explicación de voto. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Guatemala. Noted. We give the floor now to the delegation of Panama.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excelencias, tengo el alto honor de presentar en nombre de la República de Panamá el proyecto de resolución relativo a la conmemoración del Bicentenario del Congreso Anfictiónico de Panamá, que conmemoraremos en el año 2026. Este proyecto no responde únicamente a un interés nacional o conmemorativo. Se trata de un acto de reafirmación colectiva de los valores que nos unen como hemisferio. En 1826, convocados por el libertador Simón Bolívar, plenipotenciarios de las nuevas repúblicas americanas se unieron en la ciudad de Panamá con el propósito de forjar un sistema multilateral basado en la igualdad entre los estados, el sistema republicano de gobierno, la defensa colectiva y la solución pacífica de controversias. Aquella asamblea, celebrada en suelo panameño, dio origen a los principios fundacionales del multilateralismo americano. Esos mismos principios inspiran hoy la Carta de la OEA, la Carta Democrática Interamericana y nuestras más nobles aspiraciones de convivencia pacífica, desarrollo integral y respeto a la soberanía. Al conmemorar este bicentenario, proponemos que el año 2026 sea proclamado por esta organización como el año del Bicentenario del Congreso Anfictiónico de Panamá. Esta designación no solo rendirá tributo a la historia, sino que nos permitirá abrir un espacio de reflexión sobre la vigencia de los principios proclamados en Panamá en el siglo XXI, en un tiempo en que enfrentamos desafíos globales que requieren más integración, más diálogo y más cooperación. La resolución propuesta invita a los Estados miembros, a los órganos de la organización y a las entidades observadoras a sumarse a esta conmemoración mediante actividades educativas, académicas, diplomáticas y culturales que resalten el valor histórico del Congreso realizado en nuestro país y su legado vigente para el orden interamericano. Excelencias, Panamá asume con humildad el privilegio de haber sido la cuna de la anfitrionía americana y renueva hoy ante ustedes su compromiso con la defensa de los principios que brotaron de aquella histórica reunión: la opción por la paz, la prevalencia del derecho y la cooperación como fundamento de nuestras relaciones internacionales. Esperamos contar con el apoyo unánime de esta Asamblea para la adopción de este proyecto que honra nuestra historia común y fortalece nuestro futuro compartido. Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Panama. We recognize and give the floor to the delegation of St. Lucia.
Chair, fellow ministers, distinguished delegates, today St. Lucia takes the floor to endorse this resolution honoring the enduring moral and spiritual legacy of His Holiness Pope Francis. This resolution is more than a symbolic gesture. Rather, it reaffirms the kind of leadership our hemisphere needed and still needs. Leadership rooted in justice, centered on dignity, and unwavering in its commitment to peace. Pope Francis never shied away from speaking hard truths. He boldly addressed poverty, inequality, racism, environmental destruction, and the presiding throwaway culture that devalues human life. These are not just global challenges, but they speak pointedly to the current realities of the Americas, particularly for small developing states like St. Lucia. Pope Francis, through the Laudato Si', reframed the climate crisis as not merely a technical issue, but a moral imperative, one of intergenerational justice. Through his teachings, he emphasized the concept of fratelli tutti, that fraternity and social friendship are not unrealistic expectations, but are the very foundations for harmonious relations in a fractured world. A staunch advocate for the marginalized, Pope Francis stood with and for those on the peripheries, with memorable declarations on issues such as migration, where he preferred that borders be seen as bridges and not barriers, referencing the plights of migrants fleeing violence and despair. His words, "Who are we to close doors?" remain quite relevant today in light of current geopolitical tensions. It is for these very reasons that today's resolution matters. It is a resolution that reaffirms the values we champion in the inter-American system, emphasizing that justice, equity, and respect for human rights are not abstract principles. Rather, they must guide our partnerships and policy makings. St. Lucia proudly supports this resolution because it aligns with who we are as a people, committed to faith, fairness, and the belief that leadership should serve, not dominate. We also acknowledge that Pope Francis was the first pontiff from the Americas. His Latin American heritage gave profound context to our region's struggles and its strengths. He proved that the Global South's voice belongs on a world stage and must never be silenced. Mr. Chair, let this resolution do more than honor Pope Francis's memory. Let it challenge us as governments, as representatives, as citizens, to lead with moral courage, to listen with humility, and to build a hemisphere worthy of all its people's dignity. St. Lucia is honored to stand in support. I thank you.
Thank you, St. Lucia. I now give the floor to the delegation of Uruguay.
Señor presidente, señor secretario general adjunto, distinguidas delegaciones, es para mi delegación un honor presentar el proyecto de resolución titulado Conmemoración del Bicentenario de la Independencia de la República Oriental del Uruguay, Cruzada Libertadora y Declaratoria de la Independencia de la Provincia Oriental. En ese sentido, quisiera compartir con ustedes los motivos que nos llevaron a presentar esta iniciativa en este foro multilateral. El próximo 25 de agosto de este año, el pueblo uruguayo conmemorará el bicentenario de un hito fundacional, la Declaratoria de la Independencia de la Provincia Oriental, proclamada en el Congreso de Florida de 1825, junto con las otras dos leyes fundamentales que sentaron las bases de nuestra vida independiente y republicana. Estos actos culminaron un proceso iniciado con la llamada Cruzada Libertadora y constituyen un símbolo de la lucha por la libertad, la soberanía y la autodeterminación de los pueblos. En ese marco, este proyecto de resolución aspira no solo a dejar constancia de un hecho histórico para Uruguay, sino también a destacar su importancia continental, teniendo en cuenta que nuestras independencias nacionales están entrelazadas. A través del mismo se propone declarar el 25 de agosto de 2025 como jornada conmemorativa del Bicentenario de la Independencia de la Provincia Oriental e invitar a los Estados miembros y observadores permanentes a acompañar, en coordinación con la Secretaría General, las actividades conmemorativas que se realicen sin impacto en el foro regular de la OEA. Al celebrar esta efeméride, quisiéramos asimismo reiterar nuestro compromiso con la cooperación y la integración regional, valores que guiaron a nuestros libertadores y que hoy, 2 siglos después, siguen en la base de nuestros esfuerzos. Confiamos en que este proyecto de resolución contará con el valioso apoyo de todas las delegaciones aquí presentes, a quienes agradecemos profundamente su acompañamiento en este significativo aniversario para nuestra nación. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Uruguay. Delegation de Bolivia. Adelante.
Muchísimas gracias, hermano presidente. Quiero saludar en nombre de nuestro hermano presidente, Luis Arce Catacora, y del pueblo boliviano a esta asamblea. En esta oportunidad queremos presentar la resolución para la conmemoración del bicentenario de nuestra independencia de Bolivia. Bolivia nace como un país independiente el 6 de agosto del año 1825. Pero el origen de nuestros pueblos es milenario. Desde tiempos inmemorables, civilizaciones originarias que habitaron en nuestro territorio, desarrollando una cultura y ponderando realmente los grandes conocimientos de la cosmovisión andina y amazónica, que fue ignorada por cientos de años. Ha sido una recuperación y actualmente es la esencia del Estado plurinacional de Bolivia para hombres y mujeres, que ha sido posible a través de este cambio la visualización de los pueblos indígenas y de nuestras culturas. Mediante esta conmemoración evocamos el coraje de revoluciones independistas y honramos la memoria del libertador Simón Bolívar y del mariscal Antonio José de Sucre y del mariscal Andrés de Santa Cruz. Señor presidente, consideramos que nuestro bicentenario es una oportunidad para reflexionar sobre Bolivia que soñamos, pero también de un gran encuentro latinoamericano, caribeño, para darnos un abrazo de todo el recorrido que ha tenido nuestro histórico Simón Bolívar. Es por eso que estamos seguros de que necesitamos continuar esta senda de la construcción de una sociedad plural, inclusiva, para todos los pueblos de América Latina y el Caribe, sobre todo los pueblos indígenas, los afrodescendientes, las mujeres, los jóvenes y las personas de la tercera edad, quienes realmente forjaron y aportaron para que lleguemos por donde hoy nos encontramos. En este tiempo histórico marca la ruta hacia la necesidad de profundizar de nuestro Estado plurinacional sobre la base de una sociedad justa, armoniosa, descolonizadora, despatriarcalizadora, sin discriminación, ni explotación, ni con una plena justicia social para todos. Queremos continuar trabajando para garantizar el bienestar, el desarrollo, la seguridad, la protección, la dignidad de las personas, las naciones de los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades campesinas. Queremos fomentar el respeto mutuo y el diálogo intercultural que se hace hoy una necesidad en los nuevos desafíos. A través de esta resolución destacamos nuestra historia y la cultura plural, así como el horizonte común del libertador, justicia y solidaridad que nos une con los países hermanos de nuestra región. Expresamos nuestros sinceros agradecimientos a los Estados miembros por la aprobación de esta resolución para la conmemoración del bicentenario de la independencia de nuestro país y quedan todos invitados para el próximo 6 de agosto para celebrar con orgullo 200 años de libertad, de lucha histórica de nuestra amada patria Bolivia. Y todos y todas serán bienvenidas y les recibiremos con los brazos abiertos y muchísimas gracias por ese apoyo.
Thank you, Bolivia. I thank the delegations for your comments. We note your contributions to include a footnote offered by Paraguay, and there be no further comments. We consider the aforesaid resolutions adopted. Before we proceed to the next item on the agenda, I wish to remind delegations that the draft declaration on the question of the Malvinas will be considered by the General Assembly at the 4th plenary session. Accordingly, we move to item 7. We continue work with the presentation by the Chair of the Inter-American Council for Integral Development, Her Excellency Ambassador Luan Gilchrist, Permanent Representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to the OAS. Ambassador Gilchrist will provide us with a valuable insight into the activities and priorities of the city, a key organ of the OAS that plays a crucial role in promoting integral development in the Americas. Without any further ado, it pleases me to give the floor to Ambassador Gilchrist.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished Ministers of Foreign Affairs, Secretary General Ramdin, Assistant Secretary General Nestor Mendez, permanent representatives and ambassadors, distinguished colleagues, excellencies, guests, good morning. I extend a special welcome to Secretary General Ramdin, as this is the first occasion on which he's attending the General Assembly as Secretary General. I bid farewell to Assistant Secretary General Nestor Mendez in his final General Assembly as Assistant Secretary General. Chair, it is my privilege to represent the Inter-American Council for Integral Development to present CD's annual report together with the draft resolution advancing hemispheric initiatives on integral development. 6 months ago, as the permanent representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I assumed the chairmanship of the CD within decidedly altered regional and global contexts. At the time, I evoked CD's role in sharing perspectives and unearthing solutions to some of the most pervasive challenges in the hemisphere by bridging divides and inequalities throughout the Americas, coming together and connecting. Clearly, in spite of our differences, we face common circumstances, including expanding gaps between existing education systems and the needs of regional labor markets, worsening disparities between urban and rural areas, and a widening digital literacy and skills gap. In fact, ECLAC's April 2025 report on regional progress and challenges in relation to the 2020 Agenda for Sustainable Development paints a worrying picture that only 23% of the SDG targets will be met by 2030. In the face of this daunting prospect, the work of the OAS in defending democracy, human rights, security, and development must obey the pressing urgencies of our time and circumstances. In the context of these complex economic and geopolitical landscapes, the notions of resilience and inclusion assume increased relevance and urgency. Hence, the theme of this General Assembly, Building Resilient, Inclusive Economies in the Americas. Indeed, only by recognizing the interconnectedness and interdependence among all areas of our organization's work, and then by working hand in hand to move from dialogue to concrete action, can we jointly advance the prosperity and growth of our people. Herein lies the significance of the Inter-American Council for Integral Development, which I have the distinguished honor of representing today. As the premier regional forum for political dialogue on development, CD is mandated to promote cooperation among the American states. In this spirit, CD, under the guidance and counsel of the Secretariat for Integral Development, convened 6 meetings on the need to build equitable and inclusive communities in the Americas to expand access and opportunities for all, closing gaps, reducing disparities, and bridging divides. I emphasize the gaps, disparities, and divides because the unequal capacity of our member states to respond to the unique challenges that matter most to them is a pervasive issue impacting the entire organization. Member states, no matter their size or relevance in the international system, must confront these ever-widening socioeconomic gaps if they are truly to build resilient and inclusive economies. Accordingly, over the last 6 months, targeted dialogue, diverse panel discussions, and relevant calls for action have reinforced CD's collective prioritization of substance over mere discourse. Since our last General Assembly, CD has hosted 3 impactful ministerial and high-level authorities meetings in the areas of labor, science and technology, and tourism. These are the 22nd Inter-American Conference of Ministers of Labor held in Bogota, Colombia. It marked a new course for labor and employment policy dialogue and cooperation in the Americas, with the adoption of the Declaration and Plan of Action of Bogota, the Future of Work in the Americas, laying the foundations for peace, social justice, and climate action. These documents reinforce a shared regional commitment to a fair, equitable, and human-centered future of work in the Americas. The second was the 7th meeting of ministers and high authorities on science and technology held in Washington, D.C. in December. It laid a meaningful foundation for sustained dialogue on the importance of governance, regulatory and institutional AI frameworks, with the adoption of a declaration and plan of action on the development and deployment of safe, secure, and trustworthy artificial intelligence in the Americas. The outcome documents reflect the strong commitment of member states to capitalize better on the nexus of science, technology, and innovation as key drivers of the region's future economic and social development. Thirdly, the 26th Inter-American Congress of Ministers and High-Level Authorities of Tourism, also held in Washington, D.C. in April of this year, reaffirmed regional commitment to sustainable development through heritage tourism, with the adoption of the Declaration and Plan of Action of Ecuador. Harnessing the power of heritage tourism for development in the Americas, Jointly, the outcome documents emphasize the growing role of heritage tourism in distributing more equitably the economic, sustainable, and social benefits of tourism. Looking ahead, as we work in the spirit of a united organization to close gaps, reduce disparities, and shrink divides, I encourage all member states to be present and to participate actively in these ministerials. I would like to recognize Ecuador for hosting the 12th Education Ministerial in March 2026 and Barbados the 14th meeting of the Inter-American Committee on Ports in June 2026. Chair, I've also had the distinct privilege of working closely with CD's implementing body and technical secretariat, the Executive Secretariat for Integral Development. Both are deeply interconnected. SEDI works towards transforming the dialogue and regional consensus reached in CD into tangible progress. In turn, identifying and sharing solutions and promoting and expanding partnerships to deliver concrete development results across the Americas. SEDI's commitment in particular to strengthening the institutional and human capacities of member states accelerates efforts towards closing gaps, reducing disparities, and shrinking divides in the region. During the past year, SEDI has continued to do just that. Over the period, activities across key areas including education, labor, MSMEs, culture, science and technology, tourism, sustainable development, and port competitiveness focused on strengthening institutional and human capacities to support socioeconomic development and democratic governance in member states. Through cooperation and partnerships and the One SEDI approach, SEDI integrates cross-cutting priorities such as climate action into its programming nexus to advance integral development in the region. SEDI continues to engage with external stakeholders, most notably observer member states, the private sector, and academia, to broaden its reach through new partners for its language cooperation program, renewed agreements with development banks for its climate-related projects, and more thoughtful interaction with regional experts willing to provide technical assistance for South-South and triangular cooperation through CooperNet's Ask an Expert initiative. Upcoming ministerials and working group meetings in ports, education, and science and technology additionally emphasize SEDI's commitment to policy dialogue to amplify data-driven decision-making processes. In 2024, the Secretariat continued to lead its globally recognized approach to integrated water resources management program, mobilizing over $60 million in funding for member states and generating more than $12 million in direct assistance. It provided thousands of scholarships and millions in financial assistance to our region's learners in relevant areas of study. It strengthened port cooperation networks across the hemisphere to better weather the fluctuating demands of international trade. Given my limited time this morning, I regrettably cannot do full justice to the breadth and impact of SEDI's many projects and programs. I would therefore encourage you to review the comprehensive report circulated to member states for a more detailed overview of its progress and efforts. Chair, in closing, I extend gratitude to my Vice Chair, Ambassador Luis Ernesto Vargas, Permanent Representative of Colombia, and to the CD Chair from July to December 2024, Ambassador Elizabeth Darius-Clark, Permanent Representative of St. Lucia, whose sessions on trade facilitation, multi-destination travel, air connectivity, port modernization, and subnational competitiveness laid the thematic foundation for my own tenure. I extend my gratitude. I would like to extend my deep appreciation to the chairs of CD's permanent committees for their support and work over the past year, beginning with the chair of the management board of the IACD, Ambassador Luz Elena Baños Rivas of Mexico. I would also like to recognize and thank those member states which comprise the management board: Argentina, Brazil, El Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico, Panama, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and the United States, for their efforts to strengthen CD's core remit of regional cooperation and repositioning the OAS as a leader in South-South, horizontal, and triangular development cooperation. The Chair of the Committee on Migration Issues, Ambassador Alejandra Solano Cabalceta, Permanent Representative of Costa Rica to the OAS, and the Chair of the Committee on Partnership for Development Policies, Sebastián Fonseca, Alternate Representative of Ecuador to the OAS. They have my profound thanks. I would like to specially recognize SEDI's Executive Secretary Kim Osborne and offer my personal and professional appreciation for her leadership, guidance, and perspective over these last 6 months. I thank the team at the SEDI for their work. Finally, if I might speak directly to member states, to my colleagues at SEDI, and to all those with whom I have connected over the past 6 months, I offer my sincere gratitude to you for supporting the work of this Council and, in turn, the continued socio-economic development of the Americas. We gather at a time of great divide, of a disconnect that is of great concern, between and amongst our countries, our communities, and ourselves. But we must set aside our differences and continue to forge ahead in that time-tested spirit of cooperación solidaria. Our work is too important, our challenges too great and too interconnected, and our realities too complex to forego that spirit. We can only move forward as a region and as an organization by working collectively, closing gaps, reducing disparities, and shrinking divides. In the days ahead, let us share our perspectives. Let us unearth solutions and find meaningful connection as we take charge of our shared mission of advancing inclusive, equitable, and sustainable development in the hemisphere. I thank you for the courtesy of your attention.
Ambassador Gilchrist, on behalf of the General Assembly, I extend our sincere appreciation for your presentation. Allow me to make special recognition of the effort, dedication, and commitment of the permanent representatives of St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, and currently St. Vincent and the Grenadines, who have served as chair of SEDI during this reporting period. I would also wish to recognize the permanent representatives of Dominica, Costa Rica, and currently Colombia for their efforts as vice chairs of this council. SEDI's leadership and commitment to the integral development of the Americas has been exemplary. Thanks to his dedication and efforts, SEDI has strengthened its role as a key organ of the OAS in promoting partnership for development among member states. We turn our attention to agenda item 8. Where pursuant to Articles 22 and 24 of the Rules of Procedure, it is now time to install the General Committee, which will be composed of representatives of all member states participating in this General Assembly. There be no comments. The General Assembly, or General Committee, of the 55th regular session of General Assembly is hereby installed. At item 9, we move along to the assignment of topics and election of officers of the General Committee. And in accordance with the agreements reached and recommendations made by the Permanent Council at its last regular meeting on June 18th, following its work at the OAS headquarters, in preparation for this regular session, the General Committee will be responsible for reviewing the draft resolutions that did not reach consensus in Washington. I ask that we note that negotiations will focus solely on those paragraphs with comments, reservations, or that have not yet received consensus from the delegations. Additionally, the General Committee may consider any draft submitted after June 18th, the date of the last Permanent Council meeting, and before 9 a.m. of yesterday, Wednesday, June 25th. This in accordance with the established deadlines. Accordingly, I'm pleased at this time to give the floor to Assistant Secretary General, Ambassador Nestor Mendez, who will provide us with information on documents that are in the situations described above. In that context, Ambassador Mendes, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Distinguished ministers and heads of delegation of member states, ladies and gentlemen, in addition to the resolutions that have just been approved by this plenary, the Permanent Council has considered 2 draft resolutions for which consensus has not yet been fully achieved. Certain paragraphs remain under discussion and therefore require further consideration by the member states. Accordingly, the Permanent Council transmitted these resolutions to this General Assembly with the recommendation that they be referred to the General Committee for further consideration. The draft resolutions are as follows. Number 1, draft resolution entitled Calling for Concrete Solutions to be Brought to Bear as a Matter of Urgency to Resolve the Grave Security and Institutional Crisis in Haiti, document AG/Doc 5882/25. For this draft resolution, 24 paragraphs have been agreed upon by the Permanent Council, and 7 paragraphs received comments from a delegation and are recommended for consideration by the General Committee. Number 2, draft resolution entitled Establishment of a Credentials Committee for Organs of the Organization of American States, document AG/Doc 5888/25. For this draft resolution, 11 paragraphs were agreed upon by the Permanent Council. 1 paragraph received comments and requires further consideration, and 7 paragraphs have not yet been considered and remain pending. It is recommended that the General Committee reviews the paragraphs with comments and the 7 pending paragraphs. Mr. President, I also wish to inform the plenary that these are the only 2 documents that have been transmitted to the General Committee, as no additional documents were received prior to the deadline for the submission of new proposals, which expired yesterday, June the 25th at 9 a.m. This concludes the report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Secretary General, for your report. Delegates, as you have heard from the Assistant Secretary General, the General Committee has a specific mandate and a limited time frame in which to do its work. I would therefore like to remind the delegations that the General Committee must conclude its work tomorrow before the start of the 4th plenary sessions. That is to say, by no later than 3 p.m. To facilitate the General Committee's work, a rapporteur will be elected from among its members, who will be responsible for submitting to this plenary a detailed report on the results of the tasks assigned to the committee. That report, in accordance with the provisions of Article 25 of the Rules of Procedure, is to include a summary of the discussions held in the General Committee, the conclusions reached regarding each of the draft resolutions, and the General Committee's recommendations to the plenary of the General Assembly. I am confident the General Committee will discharge its tasks efficiently and effectively, and that its report will be a valuable contribution to the deliberations of this plenary. I offer the delegations that will partake in the work of the General Committee my advance thanks for their dedication and for their commitment. Let us now proceed to the election of the chair of the General Committee. In that regard, I now give the floor to distinguished delegations for nominations. I recognize the delegation of Antigua and Barbuda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'll be very brief. Antigua and Barbuda is pleased to nominate for the chairmanship of the General Committee the distinguished ambassador of Brazil, Benoni Belli, who has served us well as the chair of the Permanent Council over the last 3 months, and who's also served in the work that we've been doing in Washington in the preparatory committee. There can be no better person to guide us through the work of the General Committee that is before us and to bring it to a successful conclusion. We have great pleasure in nominating Ambassador Benoni Belli. Thank you.
Thank you, Antigua Barbuda. I recognize the delegation of Bolivia.
Muchísimas gracias, hermano presidente. El Estado Plurinacional de Bolivia también tiene a bien proponer aquí en Antigua Barbuda sobre la presidencia de la Comisión General de las 55 asambleas a nuestro hermano embajador del Brasil, a Benigno Bellis, para que conduzca esta comisión por su gran experiencia. Además, valoramos siempre al hermano país del Brasil, un país que ha tendido muchos puentes para lograr la integración, la unidad latinoamericana y caribeña. Entonces, ¿qué más mejor, ¿no?, que el compañero Benigno, con esa experiencia que tiene, realmente pueda hacer la conducción de este espacio? No podemos hablar de avances y lograr una integración si no tenemos realmente ese liderazgo y la visión del multilateralismo y sobre todo la unión de nuestras regiones para que podamos tener resultados a lo que todos soñamos. Soñar de una integración real, soñar de una participación real, ¿no? Por ejemplo, me traía el recuerdo el hermano de Panamá, donde ha planteado que se van a celebrar 200 años del multilateralismo, que quien fue ese líder, Simón Bolívar. Y nosotros seguimos esta senda, así que nuestro apoyo para nuestro embajador del Brasil. Muchas gracias.
I am pleased, therefore, to announce that Ambassador Benoni Belli, permanent representative of Brazil to the OAS, has been elected chair of the General Committee. As heads of delegations know, the election of the vice chair and rapporteur will take place during the General Committee's first meeting, which will begin immediately in the Flex Room. In the meantime, I kindly remind all distinguished representatives that the dialogue of heads of delegation will commence shortly. I thank you.